welcome back to another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast, brought to you by Huntworth. Huntworth gear for all types of weather, all types of terrain, all types of budgets. It's clothing that just works. Check them out at huntworthgear.com. Well, turkey season is in full swing, and I've yet to get out in the woods. Michigan season is kind of funky, and I go back and forth on whether it's just going to be private land, trying to get out on public, but the seasons are just for a week. So May's coming up. I think tomorrow's May 1st. So I'm going to buy that last 234 season, and I think I'm going to get out. Actually, we'll get a chance to get out with my daughter, so that's going to be fun. Think I can get her on a bird this year. That's the goal. Going to try and film some of the guys from Rome, get out there, kill some turkeys, and May is going to be a fun month. I headed up to the UP to do some habitat work. Was going to try and turkey hunt up there, but it's just the amount of time that I'm going to have up there is it would be just one weekend and trying to do any work and hunt and all that other stuff. Just don't think it's in the cards, but going to get up there, do some food plots, do a little bit of kind of cruising through the property to see where I want to set up for bear. May 1st, that's when those bear and elk permits have to be, applications have to be put in. So definitely going to be doing that. That's on the radar. So yeah, lots of stuff. Just coming off of the Bowman's Club fundraiser, we were able to give away a $1,000 scholarship to a young lady who had been with the club, shooting the youth program and then through competitive archery all the way up through her senior year. So pretty cool to be able to do some of that stuff with the funds that we raised, through that fundraiser. So excited about that. Big thanks, all the people involved with this show, the Patreons that showed up in force. Thank you guys so much. Great time. Gave away a water feather, a bunch of stuff from Latitude, painted arrow, vitalized seed, Huntworth, Big Shot. So definitely go over there, give those guys a look, spend money with the people who support this show, Kanadi, Zinger, all those guys. Big Shot targets, you can save 10% using code BCP, Latitude code BHC15, and definitely check out that Ranger 22. That pack, I just swapped over all my stuff, getting it ready to go out for turkey season, and a great pack. Just, very versatile. Don't have to overpack with that one. Perfect size. So just check out some of that stuff. This podcast, kind of piggybacking off of the last NRC meeting, kind of what's going on now with Michigan's regulations. Some of the guys that have been on the podcast before, Jordan Hoover, Josh Arbogast. Josh is really doubling down with all of his social media, trying to rally everybody to get this stuff out there and focused with data and get it in front of the right people so that we can maybe change some things for the better. And with the hunter, with the deer as a resource, all that stuff in mind, and so that the hunters are actually getting a voice. And we outline kind of why some of that stuff wasn't happening, kind of what's going on up in the UP with the doe with a bow, as well as things that we can do and why we need to be attending these meetings. So all that said, fun podcast, informational podcast. And I think you guys are really it's going to open your eyes a little bit as to what's going on here in the state of Michigan and how we as hunters can get off our butts, stop complaining, and kind of make a change that we wish to see. So thanks, as always, for listening. Enjoy the episode. All right, everybody, Adam back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And today I've got Josh Arbogast and Jordan Hoover, and we're going to talk about some of the kind of goings on with the Michigan NRC, what's going on with our deer seasons, deer regulations, all of the things that are kind of happening, both I guess up front and kind of behind the scenes, and I've said it a lot. And I'm probably just as guilty as everybody else of being the guy that bitches online and not the guy that's out there and doing it. And so trying to do my part by bringing these guys on. These are two guys who are putting their money where their mouth is, especially Jordan driving down from the UP to Lansing to attend these meetings and do everything. So I just want to bring them on here and kind of like get an update. So Josh and Jordan, how are you guys doing tonight?
Good.
Doing great, Adam. Really appreciate you having us on.
So I guess Josh, we'll start with you. You've kind of like changed over your social media to something that's kind of like trying to put up. I don't necessarily say like it's a positive foot forward, but just something to try to like promote change and of kind of inclusion to bring everybody together to kind of work towards something. So what's going on with that over at on your social media?
Yeah, so, and me and you have talked about this before on the real division between hunters. You got kind of three camps, what seems like is, you got your APR guys, you got your one buck guys, you got your deer camp guys, right? And there's just a lot of division. And it's always a lot of argument and a lot of spewing back and forth. None of it is really ever fact related. It's never really conservation based. It always has a goal of just guys that want to fill the freezer versus guys that want better deer management, or some guys, that just want bigger antlers, right? And so I kind of started to switch everything over to try to put some facts out there on. I don't want to say bring everybody together because nobody's ever going to be all in one room. That'd be great, but to try to put some things on paper and give a little bit more of a visual representation on how to change things here in the state. More so facts, numbers, management based, slides, visual representation rather than when you put things verbally, guys get to arguing, right? If I tell you that, like, we're gonna take the youth doe harvest for example. If I say it's only 2% of the harvest, some guy's gonna come back and say, well, that's 2% of dads shooting deer, right? Well, if you put it on a visual representation, there's no argument, right? Because numbers don't lie. So it's just more so to put it in a visual representation, help you retain the facts a little bit better, maybe absorb it before you want to start to oppose it a little bit.
Sure. And I think that that's a great approach. And I think, the visual representation is both good and bad. And I'm going to play devil's advocate on this. I'm just because that's what I do. But like, so for me being like through all my college and all the things, like we were taught to like look at graphs and things like that. And so you look at things like whether they're statistically significant or clinically significant. So 2% might not be a big deal to some, and where 2% it's is it 2% of 2 billion or is it 2% of 200? And so when we say things like that, and we can make that graph look however we want to, so the to put it both ways, it kind of is important to see the actual extrapolated number more so than just a percentage, because where I didn't think that you were going to go with that to say that's 2% of dads shooting deer. I thought you were going to say, well, that's 98% that aren't,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
if that's 200,000 or if that's 400,000 of a 2 million, well then maybe that's a pretty more significant number than just that little 2%. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I'm just using a general example when they're, what we were presented with at the NRC meeting, and, Jordan obviously has this on a much deeper scale, but what there's that example was 2% of the deer harvest is contributed by the youth season or youth.
yeah. And I do want to kick it over to Jordan, and I think it's great for, to do that in the numbers, right? So Jordan, like I think since we last talked, like you're now the chairman of the UP Deer advisory team, right, or something like
Yep.
that.
Yep, the UP Deer Advisory Team.
Yeah. And so when Josh is here talking about numbers, and I just pulled up the deer harvest for Michigan, one of our Patreons, he had said, the amount of deer, and the big thing is like does in the UP and all of that stuff. And when we're talking about numbers, I looked, and up there near Copper Harbor or something, there was like 161 deer reported, right? And then, you're looking in the triple digits around that top, 500 here, 600 there. And that's reported, right? And I think that that's where I have hunted in the UP my entire career of hunting. I'm familiar with somewhat of the mindset up there, and I know that there's people down here that have that same argument that say, well, that's only the amount of people that reported. That's not the number of deer that were harvested, and there's people that shoot deer all year round. And so do you think that those numbers that are reported are accurate for the actual harvest, or do you think that that's just the number? Obviously it's just the number of people that have reported, but how big is that gap there?
You know, obviously, I'm not privy to the DNR models in specific and how they function and how they extrapolate their data. But I do know, their deer population estimates, things like that, when they're playing around with those sort of things, they're pulling data from all different places. For example, car deer collision statistics or DMAP tags or reported buck harvest, whatever it is. So it's kind of a conglomerate, this big soup, if you will, of data that goes into the pot. And it's not any one data point, I don't think, that really carries the day. It's the conglomerate of the data points that in the end matter. Now, to directly answer your question, do I basically have a high confidence in the reported harvest? No, I don't. And I guess I'll just speak frankly. The UP is one of the few places I would argue left in the lower 48 that is kind of one of the last frontiers of freedom. And people here have a decidedly anti-establishment view, and they believe in small government, and they don't want people sticking their nose in our business. And I think that there's a lot of guys that feel really strongly that it's not anybody's business where I shot my deer, and I'm not telling you nothing. I think that's a very real issue that we have here. And the irony of it is the very same guys, right? They'll come out at the DNR and they'll say, well, you guys don't know nothing. You don't have any data. You don't have nothing to stand on, but then they don't want to give them any data.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I would say too. I mean, that's where I was going with that is I feel like that 106, I dare say that there's we're double, at least double. And again, so Josh, back to like what I was talking about, right? If I say double the amount of deer were shot in whatever county that is up in Copper Harbor, the tip of the UP, you could be like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of deer. Well, that would be 322 deer. Like that would be another 161 deer, which in the grand scheme of things. And then to the same point, if you are as we're getting into this like doe with a bow thing and doe harvest and buck to doe ratio, if you're a suit in Lansing that just fly fishes and doesn't know anything about the UP, doesn't know anything about deer hunting, and you say, well, they only killed 161 deer up there, and our deer numbers are low, then they're gonna say, well, we can't be killing these deer because they only killed 161 of them, and there's how many people and how many hunters, how many tags were sold up there, because they don't have the data. And so that's a real problem.
It is a problem. I mean, that is a problem. And I think that this is kind of where we start to enter the conversation of, and Jordan kind of alluded to it, where I don't want to say that we need to trust the government, right? Because none of us, we're all kind of the same mindset. We've all been here our whole life. But we all need to trust the process in the aspect of this is what we're attempting to do to fix our problems, right? And they've thrown us a bone here with the deer advisory team. I think that this is a huge deal. It started with the DMI, right? But then they threw us another bone with the deer advisory team. And these aren't elected officials, these are volunteers, these are hunters, these are sportsmen, and they're attempting to make a difference. and we need to support them. We really need to support them. So if they're asking us to report accurately, then we need to do so. We need to follow suit. We need to help our brothers, our sportsmen, and do what they're asking us to do so they can paint a more accurate representation of what's going on. And if it's an issue, I promise you that they're going to backtrack because they want the right thing going on. Jordan's been fighting this fight for a long time. So if he's up in the UP, which I don't know much about, but he's got my full support. And that's, me going to these NRC meetings. If this is the issue that's at hand that we can get past, this is step number one. And I'm going to stand behind him and I'm going to support what he's telling me. These are people that are in the woods, that are living this lifestyle. They got my support, man. And, I can only speak to what is going on down here in the Lower Peninsula. But as me and Jordan have talked about before, biology is biology no matter where you are. If it's in the Upper Peninsula, Lower Peninsula, outside of this state, Florida, Mexico, it doesn't matter. The deer are going to be deer no matter where they are. And the same rules apply regardless. It's just the habitat that changes.
So, Jordan, can you talk a little bit about the UP Deer Advisory Team and what the role of that advisory team is, and then kind of what you've seen from both sides, being received by the people who appointed you and then by the general public, I guess, in the UP that you may be butting heads with?
Sure. Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to establish the distinction between the DMI and the DAT, because those are two different things. So the DMI, which happened in 2024, the Deer Management Initiative, was asked for and operated under the direction of the Natural Resources Commission. And the department basically served as a proctor or a little bit of a guide through the process, but it was the commission's baby. And when that process completed last spring in a total dumpster fire, the commission pretty much dissolved. I shouldn't say pretty much. They did dissolve the DMI. And, myself and a lot of other members of our UP team and the LP team all talked to the department. We talked to some of the commissioners and we said, hey, we really see value in this team and the work of this team in both peninsulas. We'd like to see this continue. And the department really took that to heart, and they picked it up and they ran with it. And then they crafted the Deer Advisory Team. And it's the same thing. There's a UP and LP team. And a lot of the individuals at the table are the same. There's been a couple people that have come and gone on both teams, but by and large, it's the same core group. Which is really helpful because we already spent an entire year together and everybody's up to speed on the issues and the data. So nobody's dragging behind. So it makes a difference, in my opinion, being under the leadership of the department as opposed to the commission. We've got biologists at the helm right now, which from my perspective makes all the difference. And, no disrespect to the commissioners, but all but one of them are not biologists, and most of them don't live the way that we live. They don't understand the intricacies of all of these things. So it's nice to have biologists at the helm steering the conversation. The DNR has been really good to work with, honestly, really receptive. Chad Stewart is basically the one on the controls right now, and Sarah Thompson also, she's our wildlife chief. She helps out in the process. We've had Chad Fedewa, who is kind of backfilling Chad Stewart's role at the time, because Chad's actually been promoted from head deer biologist to, what is it? I'm going to butcher his title. It's like regional species management specialist. So everybody that we've dealt with has been good to work with. They're listening. And anytime we ask for data on a subject, whether it's black bear depredation or whether it's winter severity, whatever it is, the department has been really good about providing that data to us. As far as, community level feedback, I think it's been really good overall. I started doing something a few years ago that I coined the DOE project, DOE, which stands for Deer Outreach and Education. So I'll travel around on my own dime and go to sportsmen's clubs, and I kind of give them, a list of topics. What do you want to hear about? You want to talk about wolf depredation? You want to talk about deer yards? You want to talk about fawn fecundancy rates? Whatever, antler development. And I'll just go there and we will just literally talk deer. And people have a lot of questions, of course, about the process, how the sausage gets made, and deer in general. And it's been a really, really good opportunity to broaden a few perspectives a little bit and to gain valuable feedback from other areas of the UP where, I don't personally hunt. It's been good. Unfortunately, I would say overall, the public perception has been kind of skeptical as to our ability as a team to get anything good done for the deer herd. As you're well aware, the DMI ended rather badly last year, and the NRC unilaterally rejected all the recommendations from both teams. So, there's some people kind of sitting back and saying, yeah, we'll see. Have fun beating your head against the wall.
Yeah, and that, I guess, is the basis of my question, because it seemed like with the DMI, what happened was there was some very loud voices that had political ties or whatnot that were kind of pulling the strings on the NRC panel, and it seems that there's the old guard in the UP that don't want to kill does, and so I've read a lot of things that you've put out and that Josh has put out through his page with proper buck to doe ratios and all of those things. And we think about that, in a very utopian world for us, saying, okay, well, look at Ohio, look at Indiana,
Right.
look at Iowa, look at Kansas. And we, a lot of people say, well, we need these buck to doe ratios to grow bigger bucks. But again, if you're dealing with Chad Stewart and the DNR and the biology of it, is that it should be about like herd health and not just antlers and what the quote unquote trophy hunter wants, right? And that's, I've kind of taken a step back, not like in the way that I feel about any of this stuff, but just the way that I approach it. Whether you can complain like about having muzzleloader season be the entire rifle season, right? Like you can just use whatever weapon, for the entirety of the muzzleloader. But we're not shooting enough does here in the Lower Peninsula, so they're just trying to say, hey, here's an opportunity to kill as many animals because we need these deer to be killed. And then in the UP, again, if I'm a fly fisherman in a suit and I see that they only killed 161 deer, maybe I think that there's only 165 deer in the UP in that county. So why would I want to open up more deer harvest? Right. So what's going on with those numbers as far as buck to doe ratio, the fawning, the buck health, all of that?
Oh, that is a big question. That is a multifaceted answer, and I'm going to do my very best to break that down succinctly and try to be as brief as I can. But know that is a complicated answer, Adam. So first and foremost, I guess you got to start at the beginning, which was 2015. And that was the year that the Natural Resources Commission decided to revoke the archery doe tag throughout the Superior watershed. And that decision was a direct response to two severe winters back to back in 2013, 2014, when a lot of deer died. You might recall, Adam, I don't know how bad it was where you're at in the UP, but in 2014, I got 38 inches of snow the night of the 14th, literally overnight, 38 inches. It was a tough year. Everybody was kind of wringing their hands, and a lot of the stakeholder leadership, a lot of the old heads was just climbing the walls with the commission. You got to do something. You got to do something. And 2015 was also Chad Stewart's very first year with the department, just as a data point there. So they all went to Chad and they said, Chad, you got to do something. And he looked at the regulations and he goes, man, this is the most restrictive license structure. There's nothing left to take here. What do you want me to do? And honestly, Adam, it became not a biological decision, but a decision made because, air quotes, we have to be seen doing something. And that something was taking away the archery doe tag. The stakeholder group leaders felt that that would make a difference. And the base ideology there is does make babies. So if we don't shoot the does, then we're going to have more deer. Unfortunately, that's a complete biological fallacy. And if you consult any respectable deer manager across the country and ask them if warehousing does is successful, they will tell you no. It simply doesn't work that way. But nonetheless, that policy was put in place and largely agreed to amongst Yoopers because everybody wanted to do something to help, at least in the short term. And that's all that that regulation was ever supposed to be, was a short-term protocol to help buffer bad winters. Well, 10 years later, that policy is still in place today. And numerous times throughout the years, Chad Stewart and the Department of Natural Resources have come back to the commission and they've said, listen, we need to reverse this. And we're concerned about what we're seeing. We're concerned about herd health dynamics, buck to doe ratio. We need to put it back. And the old heads in the UP have been able to bring significant political pressures to bear and maintain that policy against the recommendations of the department for the last decade. This was a cross that I took up the year that it happened, because from my perspective, when you're making a management decision, it's got to be grounded in scientific evidence and it's got to be defensible with data. We don't just walk into the control room of deer management and start flipping levers and turning dials because we got to do something. You do the right thing at the right time in the right way. Otherwise, you pay the price. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but eventually you'll pay. And we have. This policy in the UP has devastated us. And a lot of people don't understand the biology of why. So I'm going to hit 4 points here. In a healthy herd, a buck to doe ratio that's considered good in a wild free range herd might be 4-1. That's pretty darn good if you can get to 4-1. So in a healthy herd, a buck will lose roughly 1/3 of his body mass index during a traditional breeding phase because they're not eating much. They're just running, they're chasing does, they're fighting. They're continuously losing fat. So when you have these buck to doe ratios that we have, which I'm pretty comfortable, Adam, using a broad brush and saying approximately 12-1, plus or minus preseason. There's areas I know that are better than that. There's areas I know that are worse than that, but I'm pretty comfortable with 12-1, which is triple what it should be. So if we do the fast math, what's 3 times 1/3? Well, that's a dead buck. That's the thing that people don't understand, I don't think, is that bucks are hardwired that they're just going to continue seeking hot does. As long as there's does that are entering estrus, and they will continuously every 28 days until they get bred, those bucks are seeking, they're chasing, they're breeding. We've had bucks on trail cam here in the western Michigamme highlands that were breeding the end of January. Just insane. You see spotted fawns into late October, even early November some years. So heightened buck mortality is the first data point because we're on kind of the northern edge of whitetail deer range. And when a buck, or any deer for that matter, enters into the deer yard for the winter, they're in continuous calorie consumption. They're losing the entire time they're in the deer yard. So whatever reserve they go in with, that's what they've got to coast on until spring. They're not going to go into a deer yard and replenish themselves. And I don't think that a lot of people understand that. So when you have bucks that are absolutely run ragged, they just simply don't make it through the winter. I think we're losing a lot of our best breeding class bucks to malnutrition, and of course depredation's an issue. When they're that weak, they're that run down, they can't defend themselves. So heightened buck mortality is data point number 1. Number 2, the backside of that drawn out breeding phase is drawn out fawn drop. So in the spring, instead of having a nice tight fawning window, it's really elongated. We're seeing fawns born over a span of 3 to 4 months. everybody's probably pretty familiar with the predator prey study. Mississippi State University collaborated with the Department of Natural Resources on that. One of the interesting pieces of information in that study that they found was that in instances like ours, where that buck to doe ratio is drawn out and the fawn drop is really drawn out, is that our predation on fawns was significantly higher. And the logic was couched to me in this way. They said, if you're a coyote and you walk into a thicket and a dozen fawns go scattering off in all directions, which one do you target? You probably don't get any of them. But if you walk into the same thicket and one fawn runs left and one fawn runs right, you're probably going to get one. That makes a lot of sense to me. And they had a technical scientific term for it, which escapes me at the moment. But anyway, higher depredation on fawns was bullet point number 2. So number 3, deer puberty is approximately 80 pounds. So when you get a yearling doe that gets what she needs nutritionally, she hits that 80-pound threshold, she will breed and successfully carry to term fawns the following spring as a year 1 doe fawn. The problem is, with so many late-born fawns, we have year 1 does that are not reaching that 80-pound threshold. They're not entering into estrus year 1. They're not breeding year 1. So that hurts fawn production and fawn recruitment. That's strike 3. Number 4, a percentage of those does as well that are kind of on the bubble, and maybe they go into heat and they breed successfully, but they're borderline. The doe's body will actually absorb that fetus, choosing its life over the young fawn. So you have a percentage of those does that do get bred that don't actually bear a fawn. You have another percentage of those does that simply are too late born to survive their first winter. You're looking at extremely high fawn mortality rates across the board for a plethora of reasons. And I've seen some estimates that suggest as few as 30% of our fawns will survive on an annual basis. And you hear people say all the time, especially some of the old heads, man, the deer herd, it just doesn't bounce back like it used to. It just doesn't bounce back. Well, when you're talking about a 30% fawn survival rate, of course not. Of course not. And on the back end of this, and this is another discussion that we can save, but our winter complexes are not in good condition. 30 of the 36 DWCs that we have right now are not meeting sufficient food and shelter metrics according to the DNR. So when you have a policy that you're going to warehouse does, and by the way, a pregnant doe will consume 2.5 times the amount of calories that a buck will, or a doe that isn't pregnant. So you're going to cram these struggling deer yards full of pregnant does who are going to eat everything that isn't nailed down. You see the problem. So the idea here, and a friend of mine had a really great analogy. He says, a bucket only holds so much water. Well, that's kind of the deer yards, right? That determines ultimately what carrying capacity is in the UP. It's the condition of our winter habitat and nothing else. Because if they can't survive the winter, it doesn't matter what you do. You can feed them 40 metric tons of hay. You can save every doe in the universe, but you're only going to fit so much water in that proverbial bucket. All else is going to starve. It's going to be eaten. It's going to be prone to disease, whatever the case may be. So, in short, those are the biological bullet points for why that hasn't worked, and it demonstrates the need for correction.
And so in that scenario, by shooting more does in archery season, it will just create a better balance of buck to doe ratio and create more bucks. So essentially you're saying that the UP is in some ways hit, at least in that area, has hit its carrying capacity, and it's overloaded with does. And I think one thing that you didn't say in there, or you'd have to like kind of figure it out on your own, is that some of those fawns that are being eaten by the coyote when he goes left, the ones that are being reabsorbed, and those does that are dying, some of those are bucks, right? And so the bucks that do make it are now, as soon as they can breed, they're the ones running themselves to death and so we're just leaving more does, right? Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, and I mean the keystone to this whole thing is all of the bullet points that I highlighted. You know, your multiple strikes against fauna recruitment, fauna survival, heightened buck mortality, damaging winter complex habitat. Every single one of those problems stems from severely imbalanced buck to doe ratios. Well, how do you fix that? You conservatively tighten the ratios.
So from your words, the old heads who are saying that, that the herd is not bouncing back or whatever, um, do they say that there is a low deer population in the UP, or is it more of a they're just not seeing the bucks?
So that's a two-part answer. The first one is people do say they see fewer bucks, but the broad assertion from the old heads is air quote, we just don't have any deer. Um, so the first statement is true because that ratio imbalance is inducing heightened buck mortality. So yes, we are seeing fewer bucks than we used to. That is true. So there is simultaneously a surplus of doe and at the same time not as many bucks as there used to be. So they're not wrong in that assertion. But we just don't have any deer. Let's talk about that. Um, are there areas of low deer density? Absolutely, there is. It's not 1994, and we don't have 1.2 million deer strewn all over the roads and 200 deer in every field from here to the bridge. Those days are gone. And I would add that those were pretty unhealthy days as well. If you look at it from a biological perspective, we far exceeded carrying capacity. We paid for it. But across the UP, and I cover 4 to 5 counties and thousands of miles a year on the truck, the ATV, wearing out pairs of boots. Um, Full disclosure, I'm not your Joe average hunter. I'm pretty passionate about it. I live the life. I'm in the woods, thousands of hours in season and out. And, I don't want to bag on them, but these guys are 65 to 70 years old. They're not doing what I do. They've got their camp property or whatever it is, and they've got the heated box blind that's been the honey hole since 74. And they go out and dump out the sack of corn, and their truth is the view from the window of the box blind. Are they telling you the truth? I'm sure they are. Whatever they're espousing to be fact is fact, but they lack perspective because it's limited to the small area that they're overlooking. And I think it's important to point out that hunting, by its very nature, its history, is a nomadic endeavor. And things change. The landscape changes. Last year you had a great acorn crop. Maybe this year you got nothing. Maybe, you're hunting the highlands in October and you haven't had a drop of rain, so there's no deer up there. They're all in the river valley. There's so many components to successful hunting, and you have to be adaptive. You have to change. And I think a lot of these guys are just at the age where they can't and or won't do that anymore. So it's important to keep that in perspective when we're having these conversations. They're not lying, but their perspective is perhaps limited.
So, Josh, I'll go over to you, because what kind of like what Jordan just said about the optics, right? Is their truth is what they're seeing from the blind, and that's kind of what we see on social media and Facebook and these groups, and whether it's a APR group, a 1 buck group, let them go, let them grow, any of this stuff, everybody just has their own like opinion from what they've seen in their thing. And what we talked about at the beginning and what you had said is trying to get people all on the same page. And so how are we going about doing that at these meetings? Because, Jordan saying he's been doing this for a long time. You're kind of just stepping into the fray, going into the meetings, throwing your hat in the ring. So like kind of what's going on with this at the meetings to change these opinions or to, I don't know, rewrite the narrative, I guess.
Yeah, so like I'll just come out and be honest. Like you said, I'm very new to this. Okay, I haven't been doing this for years. I'm very new to this, and I'm just trying to get people involved. I think I showed up last time with four guys. Two of us talked. I hope that we made an impact with the things that we said. We spoke to things in the lower peninsula. But like I said, I hope that we're heard. So the plan is to keep talking until we're heard, right? Justin Root, I thought, made a really solid point during the meeting that, he said, I've been hunting 30 years. Literally nothing has changed for us down here. And one thing that I want to add, and just kind of piggyback on what Jordan was saying about habitat carrying capacity, one thing that worries me going forward is the amount of deer, like as they're concerned with the lack of deer in the UP, so they say. I'm concerned about the excess of deer in the lower peninsula. They tell us that we're in surplus of a million deer in the lower peninsula, I believe was the number that was thrown out there. And all we have to go off of is the numbers that they're giving us, right? So that's what I'm going off of. If not, we have nothing. So it's our starting point. We have to have a starting point, and it's what they're giving us. And they're attempting to do that. So I'm going with it. And from what I see, I see all these deer, and I hunt the thumb. I hunt, a lot of areas just mid-Michigan and things of that nature. It's a lot of ag and a lot of small blocks of timber, right? And they're absolutely packed with deer in these small blocks of timber. And it's not sustainable. It's really not. I mean, you can throw a rock and 20 deer pop out of a 1 acre woodlot, okay? And a lot of this is on private, but how long can that continue? We're seeing all these deer kind of spread out down here into cities, and then you got people complaining that the DNR wants to give the green light on sharpshooters. Well, that's what's going to happen when the deer don't have habitat, right? These deer didn't just come out of anywhere in these cities. I mean, they're being flushed out is kind of what I'm seeing, because there's not enough habitat for these deer to continue to flourish at the levels that they're doing it. And people want to get upset, but the fact is the DNR relies on us to manage this herd. We are, in the lower peninsula, the number one predator of deer. Like, they rely on us to manage this herd. And when we don't do it, there's going to be other measures taken or greenlit to allow it to happen. And I think that's one of the biggest arguments that we're facing right now is, people getting upset about things like this. But ultimately, and I'm not pointing fingers, but this is our fault as sportsmen, and that's why we need to get involved. We need to be keen to these facts that they're giving us. Okay, we need to really acknowledge what they're telling us and not say you don't know what you're talking about, because they do. I really believe that they do. And we need to embrace it, and start saying, hey, maybe there is too many deer. Maybe I shouldn't have 40 does in my, 2 acre woodlot, and I should do a little bit of control on that. Because all that excess of deer, with the absence of the winners that the UP has, look what that abundance of deer did to the UP habitat. And we're in total surplus of deer down here. We just don't have the winners. Eventually, this could be a problem.
So I've not been to one of these meetings, and I like some of the questions that you guys are putting out there on social media as far as what are your barriers to getting there, to try to make these things more reasonable. But it's got to be, and I whatever, I'm small government too, but it's got to be really difficult for the NRC, who they don't really. It doesn't sound like, I guess, in the way that they've been painted, is that they're not on the same passion level as we are, generally speaking, in deer hunting and things like that. But the two guys that are sitting in front of me right here couldn't have stories that are further apart. So there's deer everywhere here, and there's deer nowhere here. But it's and we it seems like a very difficult seat to sit in, right? And for the meetings being in Lansing, covering all things, not just deer, not just the things that we care about, but wolves, coyotes, bears, everything else that's involved. Um, the the bureaucracy that happens has to be just, I don't know, infuriating, I guess, is like the best way to like put. I mean, I'm just trying to like even just put myself in the room, and especially if you're, it's hard enough to get to a meeting for someone in the Lower Peninsula or something like that. So to be heard and well represented from the UP, when you have guys that are your cronies, where you just call and say, hey, this Jordan guy's saying this stuff down here at the meeting. uh, Bob up in the UP, like, what are you seeing on your managed farm up there? What do you think? It's got to be really, really difficult. So, like, for you guys, what do you see as like a good way forward for people who do want to make a change through all of this like red tape and bullshit?
So the first thing is, um, we're going to have to eat the elephant one bite at a time. This isn't going to be a one stroke or even a 3-step process here to success, because let's be real frank, we're in a mess in the UP and in the LP, and everybody's drowning in bureaucracy and hand wringing over what the social fallout or the political fallout might be from making a decision. Nobody wants to piss anybody off. Everybody wants to just kick the can down the road, and we'll just leave it like it is, because then nobody's going to be mad. Unfortunately, the resource suffers. And ironically, isn't that why we're all here? Isn't that why the commission's there, the department, the sportsmen? Aren't we all here for the resource? Well, this comes back to one troubling question, and that's, what drives us as hunters, as outdoorsmen? And, I was having this conversation with Josh a little earlier, and, our grandfathers and our fathers left us an incredible legacy of conservation. They built something incredible that they handed off to us. And we've lived large, basically in the shade of everything that our grandfathers and our fathers before us built. And I think there's starting to become an awareness that these things are not going to endlessly self-sustain, and that we can't just simply hand over our $50 a year to the, whatever Deer Association of America, or, the Bear Club, or whatever it is, and think that we've done our part. My old man had a saying when I was growing up. He said, stewardship is an action word. That is so true. That is so true. It goes beyond just your harvest choices or you hinge cutting some trees and improving your habitat. Stewardship includes dealing with the bureaucratic BS that we do, because that's part of the process. And here's the thing. Whether or not you choose to be in the room, whether or not you choose to be at the table when these decisions are being made, when these discussions are being had, if you don't sit at the table, you are being spoken for. It's just that simple. And I realize there are a ton of barriers, and we've dissected that so many times. Commission meetings are 8:30 in the morning on a Thursday. Well, what's the backbone of the hunting community? It's the blue-collar working man. That's a huge problem. The UP. Good Lord. I'm over on the western end of the UP. It's a 1,000-mile round trip for me to go to a commission meeting to speak for 5 minutes. There's some serious issues there, some serious barriers that I believe can and should be addressed through the legislature, via resolution or a bill or something. But getting back to what drives us and the heart and the soul of conservation, we got complacent. Somewhere along the line, we had it so good that we stopped defending our square. Like, oh, we're good. Like everything's fine. The table's set. Let's just go enjoy this. Um, but that's not reality because there are forces that oppose our way of life. There are bureaucracies that make ignorant decisions that do harm. You know, we can't just crawl into the tent and go to sleep at night. I mean, somebody still has to stand sentry, more or less. And it's never been more apparent to me that there is a dire need for that awakening to hit the average rank and file sportsman that, hey, I'm going to have to do something here.
I want to say something real quick on my perception as kind of being a newcomer in this whole process, right? I thought, I always say this thing like everybody's an expert from their own tree stand. Okay, so kind of touching on what Jordan was saying about some of the old timers up in the UP and what they see, and everybody has this perception of what's going on. And when you shift your tree stand 50 yards to the left or to the right, everything changes, right? You could be seeing nothing and then you see something once you make that move. A lot of mobile guys, can attest to that. Well, that's kind of what I noticed when I went to this first, NRC meeting, right? I had this perception that this whole thing was just going to be this clown show, this circus, and don't get me wrong, there's some struggle there. But when I walked in the room, it was very evident on what was going on and who sat where. Okay, these guys over here were clear sportsmen, and these people were clearly not. And to Jordan's point, when he says, if you don't show up, somebody else is showing up and speaking for you. A lot of these people that are showing up and speaking for you are not there to represent you in the least bit. They're not there to represent the sportsman, let alone your interest as a sportsman. Some of these people are there to essentially stop what you're doing. Their beliefs don't align with yours at all. So if we're going to protest this because we're small government, then you're fighting a losing battle uphill immediately.
So that's kind of like what I was going to ask you is like, so you were saying, okay, there was 4 of you that showed up or whatever, and hopefully next time it's 8 and the following time it's 16. And just to have like those, is it just to have like those eyeballs in the room, because if you, like, let's say that in a perfect world, by this time next year, you have 150 people showing up. Well, 5 minutes times 150, if you're speaking and it isn't like you're voting, you're just giving an opinion. I mean, you would be heard, but there's not enough, time for that. So how does showing up in numbers, really move the needle other than like essentially like a show of force? Like there's more work boots than wingtips, like,
Because you're showing that you exist, period. I honestly feel that way. I think, and I've made this comment that, I was a kid and my dad used to tell me, you're going to a party, you're going to maybe getting, a little tussle with some guys, right? You got your friends that know how to fight, and you got your friends that are just a body. And whether or not you want to show up and speak may be your prerogative. Not everybody's a public speaker, but you need those bodies there to back you up. And I think that that's very important that they see that the sportsmen still exist outside of the numbers that we talk about. We are a physical presence to be there. We do have interest. We are not just giving you $40 a year and then calling it a day. We do care about what happens once we spend our money. And I think we've kind of been in this perpetual cycle of comfort, which has already been addressed, where we just buy our tags and then that's it. And yeah, there's guys that are like that, but then there's guys like us that, we're really passionate. We really care about what happens, and we want to put the resource first. And when you really get down into the nitty gritty on the different style or camps of Michigan hunters, if we can get the health of the herd semi-optimal, everybody's in a happy place. They really are. Your meat hunters are in a happy place. Your guys that want to chase, mature deer, they're in a happy place. Everybody's happy. But what the NRC sees, and what we have to remember, is that the Natural Resource Commission represents all natural resources, not just deer hunters. Okay, so, and they have to hear everybody that gets up there to speak. So if you have just Jordan and, one other guy that rides 1,000 miles with him down from the UP, if it's just those two that show up and sit on this side of the room, and everybody on this side of the room wants to get up there and discuss the issues with gassing of geese and coyote harvest, and they want to put a halt to coyote harvest, there's 60 people on this side of the room making a speech, and then two guys over here. You're kind of going to push the interests of these guys away because, hey, I have to listen to these people. And you're kind of getting drowned out a little bit. So it's important that we show up and say our piece, but it's also important to have those guys there that are there to back you up and, almost just morally have your back as sportsmen and really get this brotherhood back under control.
And so what things do you guys have in place to kind of and I guess, I don't know, because I feel like I'm just like putting myself on the bad side of the whole thing. I don't know how to say like, what are we doing? Like, but I'm not doing it. But so what things are in place, or what initiatives are you guys working on to get more people to these meetings?
Go ahead, Jordan.
Well, for me, it's been, I mentioned earlier that I conduct the Doe Project, which that's not a 501c3 or anything like that. It's just something I do on my own. So a lot of it revolves around education. There's a lot of ignorance in the deer hunting community that people legitimately just don't know because they've never been taught. They've never been exposed to the information. I went to one sportsman's club up north and gave a presentation last winter about the deer wintering complexes. And it was about an hour and a half, and we had a great Q&A session. And, an old timer come up to me after we were done with his cup of coffee, and he says, I just want to thank you so much for coming here and for talking to us. He said, nobody comes here. Nobody ever comes here. Nobody talks. We don't know this stuff. He goes, how do we find this information? Where do we get this stuff? People don't know. There's a cross section of people that you say, well, the Natural Resources Commission, and they nod, they look you dead in the eye, and they go, yeah, the DNR. I mean, that's what we're up against, right? So education is paramount, and you've got to get out to the sportsmen's clubs. You've got to get out to the places where your fellow hunters are in your communities, and you've got to have the hard conversations sometimes, and you got to put yourself out there and provide information and provide resources. And, that's really the fundamental key, is continuing education and not being afraid to have conversations that might make somebody uncomfortable. I'm a firm believer that disagreement doesn't have to be fatal. I'll sit across the table and have a cold one with a guy who is the biggest APR advocate, like 4 on a side and 5 on a side should be the combo tag and no buts. I'll sit across from him and I'll have a conversation. And I'll tell you what, Adam, even though there might be this one thing or maybe two things that we're really diametrically opposed to each other on, we're going to agree on 90% of everything else. And that's the hugest problem in the hunting community, is we're so polarized and we're so divided on that 10% that we don't agree on. We're busy throwing knives at each other across the room when the truth is we all agree on 90%. So my mission is to get as many hunters as I can to that 90% and keep pointing back to it. Hey, look, we all agree that we want science-based management, that biological science should be in the forefront. We all agree that we want a healthy, balanced sex ratio in the herd. We all have foundation stones of the faith, so to speak, that should unite us in cause. And Proposal G of 1996, which is the commission's mandate, set the table for that. All we have to do is follow it. And, it's easy to get caught up in passionate disagreement because, you know, you can put 10 hunters in a room and get 12 opinions. And the question was, are deer brown? I get that. But at some point, there has to be leadership in the outdoor community that kind of knocks people on the head a little bit and says, knock that off because there's more at stake. And that's kind of where we're at.
So one of the things you said there, and we're already seeing it with like the coyote stuff, right? But the proposal G, right? So if they are successful in that, and they say, okay, well that isn't sound science. We're gonna have to go back and go with the science on this one. Is there again? Because the question is like people in the room, like what how do we better things? How do we get more people in the room? How do we get, I don't want to say better people, but like how do we become more effective at the meeting? Is it a better chance for something like that, if that goes through and that sets a precedent, for it to take that same MUCC lawyer or whatever, whoever wins, because there's two suits, right? Maybe they merge. Not really up on it, but to have him in the room and be a representative for the science and to challenge the NRC at these meetings instead of just a bunch of guys going up and giving opinion.
So there's plus and minus to this. I think, and it's just my opinion, if there was a legal win, handed down by a judge that, revocation of that 3 months of coyote season violated Prop G and it must be restored, I think that will strengthen Prop G a little bit. It kind of reinforces boilerplate that, hey, biological science is how we make decisions. And yeah, we're going to have a discussion about social science and, perception and all that, but biological science is the driver. I think it's a win there. But I would certainly hesitate to utilize, I'll call it lawfare, as a way forward. A lot of these organizations, deer groups, coyote groups, whatever it may be, they don't have bottomless coffers, right? And litigation is time consuming and extremely costly. And at the end of this, even if there's a ruling in favor of restoring coyote season, great. But, MTPCA, for example, they're going to be out whatever, 50 grand. Well, that's a pretty big hit for a small organization. And how long can you keep doing that? Coughing up 50 grand. Let's say you had to sue every other year. And let's say that happened 3 times over a span of 6 years. That's $150,000 for a small club to cough up in litigation over 6 years. They ain't got it.
Yeah, but I don't think, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and that would be like a certain interest group, like saying like the Muskegon Bowmen, we decided that we were going to go up against this or whatever like that. But realistically, I mean, if you have, whatever, let's call it 400,000 hunters, and the DNR said, okay, we're going to raise your rates, but because essentially you're dealing with the DNR versus the NRC. If we had something from Pittman Robertson, if we had something from the cost of our license, like where it says, hey, do you want to round up for conservation or whatever the hell?
Legal Defense Fund.
Right. And that went for the DNR to be able to have a lawyer in the room to, when they tried to pass these things, you said, hey, we can't do that because of this.
I want to add something real quick that I've learned, though, that all this litigation and fighting against the NRC, pushing back, does not strengthen, it doesn't help the cause. The constant fight and bickering back and forth, it does not help anything. What needs to happen is, and it may be happening, we may be seeing it because now there's a biologist on the NRC, to work with the NRC through our eyes as hunters to attempt to change things. What we don't want, and I mean, he just said it, is constant litigation, cost, fights against the NRC. That's not the right way to do it.
Well, but I'm not. I I guess I hear what you're saying, but I don't think I'm saying what I'm thinking correctly. Is that if the NRC wants to do something that goes against science, I feel like it almost should be like the NRC is essentially like a Supreme Court or a jury for things that the DNR want to implement. Like they should look at it and say, very simply, like, science isn't wrong. Like we'll review it later. You know, or science isn't right. Like it does. This doesn't go with science, so we shouldn't do this. But it has popular opinion, so maybe we can, uh, you know, that would be some like arbitration to say how do we get to do this, and kind of like what you try to do with the DMI. But it seems like if it's supposed to be, if it's legally supposed to be something from the DNR that supports sound science, that should just be the bottom line, and rather than argue it in a court to figure out, because in this case they passed something that that the DNR does not believe is sound science, and that's why there is this litigation. But if that comes down and it strengthens Proposal G, then why is the NRC allowed to make things? There should be like an oversight prior to them signing something that says, does this go along with science? That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that we need to like be in a courtroom arguing the shit out. I'm just saying it seems like you should, like a legal case, say this is what we are proposing.
Checks and balances.
Is there sound science? Is it lawful? Does it help? And then the NRC votes on it instead of just saying like, we voted on it, we don't care about the science.
Unfortunately, per Proposal G, there's supposed to be that group, though.
And
You know, that's kind of what we're dealing with. They're supposed to be that checks and balances group.
right, and that's what I'm
But
saying. If
you
they
say
win,
that if you put something above them and then above them and above them, and where does it end?
You teed that up great, and I want to hit that home run ball off of that one. So the Natural Resources Commission in their inception was supposed to be the guardian in the night that ensured all these decisions were based in sound scientific evidence. That was their entire purpose. Well, obviously, we've seen some disturbing things, some crappy decisions. We're all scratching our head. People are pissed. I get it. So the big question hanging out there is, how do we fix that? And there's a lot of quick opinions that get thrown out. Well, we need to abolish the NRC, get rid of the NRC. And I wouldn't do that because I think the idea is good. The core principle, the core ideology was good. But where we have failed, okay, these commissioners are not elected. They're appointed. They're appointed by the governor, the political appointees. And that knife can cut differently depending on the color of state government and all those sorts of things that we don't even need to get into. I think we understand how it works. But where we have failed as sportsmen, where we've shirked our duty, and let me ask you this. When's the last time you, and I'm just broad, obtuse language, not you personally, Adam, just whoever. When is the last time that you, the listener, have written a letter to the governor endorsing a fellow sportsman for a seat as an NRC commissioner? Somebody who lives the life, somebody who's a respected member of your local sportsman's club, or a guy you've known for 30 years, you know, that stands for the right things. We are not promoting people from within our ranks to our elected officials to even fill these seats. And then we sit back and we're disgusted because people like us aren't in the seats. What did we think was going to happen? We're not engaged where we should be. And until we start doing what the left does very well and advocating for themselves vigorously and entrenching themselves, I mean, we've seen it all across the United States. You're getting more and more liberal state game commissions, and the impacts are dire. Michigan is not an exception. And, you know, I'm just being flippant when I say this, but when you get a commission full of trout fishing attorneys making your deer and bear regs, what do you think the outcome's going to be? We've got to get people like us in those chairs. And there's a cost to that. There's a personal cost. Being an NRC commissioner is a thankless job. And whether or not I like the way that someone necessarily does their job as a commissioner, I give them the respect for stepping up and volunteering their time and sitting at the table and sometimes taking an ass kicking from the public on a routine basis. It's not easy. And those are the things that as sportsmen, we have got to do, because until we're representing ourselves, we can't expect decisions to come down that favor our chosen way of life and our values.
Yeah, I just feel it's a hard one, and I think my vision for the NRC is probably what it was in its inception in like the utopian way. But it's like, how do you? I mean, again, more people in the room. I guess it's always like, you want those right people, and you need the right people in those seats. And how do we do that going forward? And I guess, to Josh's point, it's to get more bodies in the room, to kind of watch the process, see the process. And so, for you guys, when is the next meeting? And like, what is on the docket? If you know, like, what was tabled for the next meeting or whatever, when is that coming up, and what's going to be on it?
That's going to be May 8th. Will be the next meeting, 9:30 in the morning, and it is going to be in Lansing again. Um, Pretty much everything was tabled to this following meeting because of the fact that there were some missing commissioners at the last meeting. So the Coyotes should be voted on, I believe. Jordan, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. So the youth season, I know, is supposed to be discussed. But this is your last chance pretty much to voice your opinion going forward for the next season. Now, 25 regulations are not going to change. I'm just going to be honest that they're not going to change because you show up and make a plea for an APR at the next meeting. That's not going to happen, right? I mean, they're on like a 3-year cycle right now. So things have to be put in. We experienced that at the last meeting within 30 days, I believe, prior to a meeting before things can get on the docket, and they have to be supported by NRC members. But what you can do is show up and get a start on the next year, and that's what's important for the next cycle of what's being talked about.
And for guys that are interested in showing up, or that are considering it, and let's say for whatever reason they're passionate about X, Y, or Z, um, what do they need to do to speak? What preparations need to be made? Can any Joe Blow off the street just walk in and attend? Like, well,
You can walk right in.
So there's kind of a little bit of protocol here. So there's 3 and there's 5 minute public comment. You can walk in the door the day of and sign up a little index card in the back of the room, and they'll give you 3 minutes of public comment. Um, or you have to sign up 2 weeks or greater in advance, and you can do that at nrc.gov. You go to the Michigan DNR website, and there's an About Us tab. You click that, and then it will bring up a drop-down menu. It'll say Boards and Committees. You click that, and then you'll see Natural Resources Commission down below, and you follow the hot links there. There's phone numbers and email contacts for commissioners. If you want to speak directly to a commissioner, send a letter, send an email, make a phone call. Obviously, some are better than others at response level, but that nrc.gov goes to Ms. Brooke Parmalee, and she's kind of the administrative liaison there, and she organizes all the agendas. So if you want to get 5 minutes for public comments, you got to sign up 2 weeks or more in advance. But that's kind of the rules for the road there.
okay, all
I
right.
do want to add, too, doe with a bow. We just kind of skipped over that when I was talking. That's a big thing for the UP. Doe with a bow is a big thing for the UP, and you should honestly, that should be one of your biggest focuses on public comment. We need to address things that are on the table.
But again, like, so a guy just shows up and they say, well, I listened to Jordan. I believe what he says. Josh said, doe with the bow. They need more public comment. I walk in the door, 3 minutes. I get it. I go up there. They call my name, and I say, like, what preparation do I need? Like I fully support Jordan because he's the chairman of the UPDAC committee, and he lives a life. That's what I think should happen. Or do you need stats, or you know what I mean? Like what is helpful and what's detrimental in that situation?
So different people take different approaches, and I kind of tailor my approach depending on, I don't know how to say this, political variables, right? What's going on behind the curtain. And I've obviously got a little bit of an inside track to that, so I'm a little more able to do that. Um, you know, when I spoke in April at the commission meeting in support of Doe with the Bow, I didn't get heavy into the data and the science and the biology, and this is why, and these are the numbers, and all the things that we talked about tonight. I didn't even go there. Um, I was more personal about it. I shared my family's way of life and the value of the opportunity to harvest the doe with the bow to our communities, and how having venison on the family table in our small UP towns matters. I talked about the social aspects of it. Why? Well, because I knew full well that the department had supplied all the exhaustive relevant data to the commission. They had the information. I don't need to use my 5 minutes to tell them what they have in front of them. And there's a time and a place for that. If you get commissioners that, are new to an issue, you have newly seated commissioners, maybe you hit that ball. Maybe you bring up some information. You say, hey, we've had this no dose policy for 10 years. And instead of me justifying to you all the reasons that we need it, maybe we should be asking how we can justify continuing the policy. What fruit has been born from this policy? Can anyone tell me? There's a number of ways to skin the cat, and it's all personal preference. Some guys like to make the X's and O's arguments. Some people like to be more personal, and I think there's a place for both.
Okay. So to kind of wrap this thing up, both of you kind of closing comments on the upcoming meeting. Try to rally some people to come along with you, and kind of things that we can do going forward.
Yeah, I think to start, I think this is very important as a sportsman. I almost feel like this is your duty to start getting involved on the rules and regulations. If we're going to complain about them, then we need to be there when they're made. And I think, if nothing less, it's something to see and experience, being involved in one of these meetings and just showing up and see the way that things are wrote out, right? The way that the decisions are made. And it's eye-opening the first time that you go. It's not what you think it is. No matter what you go there with type of perception, and you think that there's going to be infighting, and it's different than you think once you're there. And I just encourage everybody to come. Man, I'll even I'll get a hotel room and open it up to as many guys as I can stuff in there the next time that, on May. So anybody needs or wants a place to stay, they got one with me. You need to be there.
Jordan?
At this point in the conversation, I don't necessarily know that I want to get too hung up on a specific reg or stump for a specific issue. But I would say this. Hunters need to understand now more than ever that they can't subcontract their personal responsibilities to another entity, another organization, or even sit back and listen to this podcast and go, wow, Jordan and Josh, I mean, they know their shit, and they got this. I don't need to go because Jordan and Josh, they got this. Wrong. absolutely wrong. I need you. Josh needs you. The state of Michigan needs you. Don't do that. Don't sit back and think that you don't have something to contribute or that somebody else is doing it better than you're going to do it. Those are all excuses in my head, right? Because each and every one of us that takes to the woods every fall, there's an unwritten oath. We're a steward of this resource. These things are entrusted to us. And there's a patrilineal descent that has happened since the dawn of mankind, where the skills of the hunter and the mantle of leadership, the responsibility of stewardship has descended from father to son, from father to son, from father to son forever. And it's our time now. It's our time to stand our post and do our part. And sometimes we have to do the less sexy, less fun things like show up to 6-hour-long commission meetings and speak our piece. That's important. And
Well,
I
like
don't
I
want
said,
anybody that's... Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say on the last podcast, like Nate Roosevelt and I are saying, okay, I think we maybe can put it in our schedule. Like I think I'm off that day, so I think hopefully Josh will have 6 guys at least.
Yeah, good.
No, I want to throw it out there too. I'm not hard to find. If there's people around the state of Michigan that want to discuss deer management, they want to talk about issues, they want to ask me questions about the commission, about the DAT, whatever it is, you can call me at home. My home phone is 906-524-2258. Be happy to talk deer with anybody who cares to.
Well, awesome, guys. I really appreciate it. And I would kind of like to continue this as these meetings go on and to see, if, you guys, but us maybe collectively can move the needle at least to see for more attendance for, kind of like the cause as it goes forward. So I appreciate you guys taking the time and coming on here and, trying to get the information out there best we can.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciated it.